is the partition of India. Only just recently, on some internet debating forum, I ran into an Indian scholar who was defending the position that the British imposed partition upon India. Now, this is a very common position in India. Everywhere you can get hands clapping by saying this. Most Indians believe it, and it is a view promoted by the Gandhians and the Nehruvians. You see, at the time of real decolonization, it was still a good thing, a fashionable thing to do, to blame the British for everything. And so it was said that the British had imposed partition upon India. Now, this is absolutely not true. The partition started in the minds of some Muslim leaders in the 1930s. In 1940, it was adopted as party line by the Muslim League. Shortly thereafter, Dr. Ambedkar wrote his book, Pakistan or the Partition of India, also called Thoughts on Pakistan, where he concludes that this is a good thing, this is inevitable, this is a natural thing. Unlike other communities, the Muslims really are a separate nation from the mainstream. You see, Dalits and Brahmins, in Dr. Ambedkar's view, were very different, had very different interests. Nevertheless, there was a certain common ground between them, and they could live together. And they could fight out whatever quarrels they had within one Indian state. But the Muslims, by contrast, he only foresaw endless trouble. And so he thought, exactly like the Muslim League, yes, it is true, they have a separate cuisine, a separate dialect, a separate script, and so on, separate dress. In most ways, they are separate, they have all the characteristics of another nation. Therefore, give them their own state and make all Muslims go away from India to their own country, Pakistan. At that time, the British at first had not heard of Pakistan, had not thought of Pakistan, and when they heard of it, they were absolutely against it. And so, the third last and the second last Viceroy, Lord Linlithgow and Lord Wavell, told Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muslim League, to his face that they would never countenance the partition of their beautiful Indian empire. You know, they had, in their own mind, they had created India as a well-rounded whole, you know, physically represented by the network of railways that they had built. In economics, represented, for instance, by the jute industry with its raw production in East Bengal and the industrial production in West Bengal. So these should not be separated. And so they said, even if we have to leave this empire, we have no interest in dividing this empire. It is only the last Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, who in about March 1947 started accepting the partition, because by that time it had become inevitable because of the Muslim League's willingness to turn to violence. So he foresaw, if they don't get what they want, they will become so impossible that perhaps it is better to give in to their demand. Also, the international circumstances had changed because of the beginning Cold War. Some people in Britain thought, well, maybe it is better to split the subcontinent, because that way one side might turn to the Soviet Union, but the other side will turn to us. And so then at least we have a foot on the ground in South Asia, you know, an outpost overlooking China, and soon after the Soviet Union, and soon after also China. So maybe this partition is has its good sides, has its merits also. But by that time already, not only the Muslim League and the Muslim electorate in its large majority, but even more and more Congress leaders who were originally against partition started crossing the floor and accepting partition. Finally, also Mahatma Gandhi in June 1947 accepted partition, thus betraying the West Pakistani Hindus who had counted on the Mahatma to stop partition. So it is essentially the Muslim League that wanted partition, Congress that was an accomplice in it, and then finally the British that also accepted it. So it is simply not true that the British imposed partition on India. Partition is something that rose as an idea from inside India, which the British initially tried to counter and which ultimately they accepted, but not wholeheartedly.